If you tally up the reach from, say, your PR activity and your Facebook channel and then your Twitter channel, there's no way of really knowing whether you're reaching the same person twice. So if you add up that figure and then say, this is the total, you're misrepresenting or perhaps misrepresenting how many people you've actually reached with that campaign. So it can be quite tricky. And another issue is just the whole idea of engagement, and that's a word I still use every day, but it's quite problematic, and it can be quite a lazy word to use because it's not really a KPI. If a strategy is built right, there's a very specific action that somebody should be taking or that you want people to take, and the word engagement doesn't really capture what that should be. It should be purchase, or it should be even a share, but what does that share actually mean relative to the campaign and relative to the bigger communications or business objectives?
Right.
And another big part of this process of establishing how you'll measure your work, beyond the KPIs, is also establishing goals and benchmarks. So I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about how you do that, how you establish goals and benchmarks for your clients.
Yeah, I think a really big mistake that's made is that the benchmarking phase happens after the strategy has been developed. Benchmarking should be the first thing that takes place, if only just to understand even what the existing brand is already doing or what their industry and like-minded organisations are doing. It's so important to glean those insights before you develop what the strategy is. It can really change what the best approach would be. There's so much to learn because there's so much data that's already publicly available and out there to help inform what you should be doing. So I think benchmarking obviously is critical. It can be a really difficult thing to do, but it has to be the first thing.
Yeah, I agree, and Carla and I spoke about it when we're the same way. We really encourage, if not enforce, that we set the benchmarks up front. We do the research. If you're working for a specific brand, what are their competitive brands doing? How much reach do they have? How many Facebook fans do they have? All those things. Let's look at it before. Let's set realistic goals based on what we see. If you have the budget for it, I always encourage doing extensive research on what the volume of conversation is. Maybe using some social power tools like Radian 6 or Crimson Hexagon. Pulling in that data so you know what the volume of conversation is already before you launch your campaign and are going to hopefully grow that much further.
Yeah, and it only helps to set expectations because it's very difficult to just fly blind and say, oh, we're going to reach 1 million Facebook fans, which every brand wants to do in their first week. How do you do that if you don't already have a really good understanding of what people are really interested in, or at least what the maximum goal could be within that space? And obviously you want to try and achieve more than that, but benchmarking is absolutely critical to success long term.
Cool. And I guess along those lines, that point about the 1 million Facebook fans, one thing that I guess we were talking about that we all come across is sometimes clients think they know what they want, like they'll ask for 1 million Facebook fans in 2014, when even Facebook is telling us that page likes aren't that important anymore. So how do you address those kinds of situations if they come across with clients where they want something and you have to sort of pull them back from where they are and kind of tell them the right path?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And there's a funny story. A colleague of mine from Miami, actually, we were exchanging stories, client horror stories last week. And one of the things he told me that his client is strict on was what their reach was with Hispanic adults over 65. So he said, we have to reach 5 million Hispanic adults over 65. So does anyone know what the problem is? Anybody know in the audience? There aren't that many. Exactly. There's much less than 5 million. So he said, he fought back and said, there's no way to do that. And he said, well, the Hispanic population is growing so fast. It's not that fast, especially with that demographic. Yes. So anyway, the point of the story is set a realistic campaign, something that is achievable. You want to set lofty goals, yes, but it has to be achievable. So.
I love that story. And I think this is just a perpetual problem. As soon as any social media channel is launched, there's always that push to just get as many fans or followers as possible. And I'm starting to see, and I think Eric would be as well, I'm starting to see a change from quantity to quality, which I hope continues, because when it comes down to it, and I think we're going to touch on this later, but a lot of this is bought these days. The way that Facebook's algorithm works, Facebook especially, is that it's very difficult to get organic reach with your content. Good content will always win at the end of the day, but it's very difficult to accumulate that without rapidly generating fans via some sort of paid promotion of your posts. And what that means is that you're really buying brand love, which is okay, and that's sort of how it is these days. It's pay for play. But the fact that brand love can be bought should result in a shift in and how much importance we pay to having that many fans or that many likes on your page. I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads. I think this is a real issue that I think everyone is hoping to get around. But it's certainly a bit of ego attached to how many fans you perhaps have on your page. And I can see now that social media is beyond the marketing sphere within organisations, you can see why there'd be a lot of pressure, especially from the top down. Executives are looking for big numbers every day. So it's the easiest thing for them to really glom onto is, how many people are actually paying attention to this content. And of course that makes sense, but more and more there needs to be a conversation around whether that's a quality audience and whether people really care about what you're saying and are willing to do something when you do say things. So.
Mm-hmm. And I guess along similar lines, it's about keeping clients real when it comes to setting goals. They want guarantees for these big numbers. And I think one of the other items you were talking about is even beyond metrics, this idea of sentiment and what role that plays and how you even start to measure it. So if you guys could expand on that.
Yeah, sentiment's a really difficult thing to measure. And Eric mentioned Radian 6 and Crimson Hexagon, and there are a number of others out there that are really trying to make some headway in this area. But in reality, there aren't any tools that can understand sentiment the way that a human brain can. And that causes a real problem, especially when you're doing large-scale campaigns where it's impossible to go through those things manually. And I've had a couple of instances where this has been a really big problem. One of them was with a large technology client of ours. And they were having a recall, which for anyone that's worked with a technology client, product recalls are quite common. And this one was around a battery that kept catching on fire. Mm-hmm. And we were doing some analysis around the announcement that had gone out about this recall, and we were trying to understand whether or not people were taking action once they'd heard about it and taking the appropriate measures, and also understanding whether people were there was some backlash that might come from it. And when we pulled the sentiment from Radian 6, it was majority neutral and positive. There wasn't a lot of conversation, which is also problematic when you're evaluating sentiment, but it was showing up as positive, and I thought, why is that? And we went in, and it was a sarcastic comment from a student who said, thanks, and I won't mention the brand, but thanks brand X. How will you help me explain to my professor that the fireball that your battery created ate my homework? And I really loved that. And then of course all of his friends started retweeting it. And it looked like it was positive, and it's not positive at all. So if that was a relatively small volume of conversations, so we were able to see what was going on there and evaluate that manually. But there isn't a way to do that with a tool right now. And if someone wants to get out there and create a tool that can do this well, you could make a lot of money for it in marketing, I think. Maybe that's what I should go and do. But it's very difficult, and there isn't a client out there that doesn't want to understand the sentiment around their brand. So it's definitely something that should be addressed.
Yeah, and Carly's right, and the thing I would just add on is that I wouldn't be afraid to get your hands dirty and actually look at the data manually, like she said, to look and see, is that really sarcasm? Is our data accurate? Is that sentiment analysis, is it good, or is it kind of flawed and fine? And see, some tools like Crimson Hexagon, you can teach it, but I don't know to the extent you can teach it sarcasm. Right,
so. Yeah, the tools that learn, and there are even some out there that offer a manual sort of human layer on top of the analytics, and those poor people that are out there trawling through all these tweets. But Adobe Social actually has just come out with a new way of evaluating sentiment, which is much more sophisticated in that it evaluates moods. I was quite excited about this when they talked to me about it, but it does take a while for the tool to learn, and even then, things like sarcasm don't get picked up.
Yeah, and we had a kind of a big conversation about this earlier, and I think, I personally think there's nobody better, when it comes to sentiment in social media, that there's nobody better than the actual community manager to tell you what the sentiment is. They know it off the top of their head. They're on those spaces 100% of the time, all of them, and should be monitoring conversations that are related to your brand, not only specific mentions. So they'll be the ones that are kind of best able to give you the best estimate, better than any tool so far, of what's really going on. But since we bring up tools, it's interesting that a lot of these tools that help pull the data from all the different platforms, they give us data, but the data on its own isn't very valuable. So can you tell us a little bit more about some best practices to interpret this data and provide clients with insights that actually mean something?
Yeah, I'm pretty hard on my employees about fluff. I don't like fluff at all. So if I see fluff, it gets deleted and it's gone, because data for data's sake, and running through something through all those tools that they have, and getting the random number generation that it does, it's unless I can explain to my client what this really means as far as benefiting their brand or people buying more of their product, it's going to get cut. And what I would rather do than that is I would actually rather spend my time, or spend my clients' or my employees' time digging through the data, even if it's manual, and having to looking through and finding what are some actual engagements that people said about purchase intent, or their emotion for the brand. Those things, I think, a lot of the time are missed by that big data. And the client, honestly, is going to be more impressed by those anyway. Maybe you're not only going to have a couple hundred versus a couple thousand, but I think it's better data overall. So my biggest thing is just data for data's sake is no good.
Yeah, I totally agree. And big data is just, it's the big thing at the moment, which is odd, because it's not like data is new, and it's not new at all to marketing. It's just that there is so much more of it now, that there's huge focus on what we do with this data. But understanding raw data and gleaning insights from that is actually a really difficult thing to do. There is a craft to it. It's an entire discipline. There are people, veterans of this industry, that have spent their entire careers understanding how to do this properly. Huge marketing firms have entire insights divisions of data scientists that this is their only job. So, with the uprise of social media and, a lot of us new marketers working out what to do with this data, it's understandable that sometimes there's fluff, which I completely agree is useless in the grand scheme of things. But it shouldn't be that we look at just for the numbers. We shouldn't just be reporting back to our clients, X amount of people shared this post. We should be looking at why they did that. What was it about this piece of content that made them share? And I think there's sort of a formula to what makes for successful results, especially a successful way of communicating insights from the data that you have at hand. You want to try and understand what combination of channel, message and content and audience resulted in the best action. It's those sort of factors that can help inform which insights are the best ones to communicate to your client, and really understanding what was it about that content. Was it a specific video that that resonated with more people on Facebook, and then drove more people through to the website to then purchase a product? That is so important. If we can see that a particular video did that, that's a really great way to shape your content strategy moving forward.
Great. And I think for the rest of our panel, we're going to focus a little bit more on this piece of it, on the interpreting the data and making it mean something. And we were talking about whether you're measuring for your own self as a brand, as a blogger, or whether you're giving some work to a client. There isn't just social media, there isn't just PR, there isn't just search and content. Like, all of these pieces come together and influence one another and tell a larger story. So I think sometimes we get lost in, like, this is what happened on social, and this is what happened in content, and when actually people are experiencing these things in the digital ecosystem, and as you said, oftentimes the audiences overlap and they're seeing the whole gamut of everything. So how does the reporting and the analysis reflect that?
Yeah.
And how do you make it do that?
Well, I think what's really exciting, especially for the sort of digital world, which for a long time was trying to, knocking down the door of the traditional marketing world and saying this is going to mean something. I think that for us, what's quite exciting is that it's not in a silo anymore. All of these insights that you are able to gather from direct communication with your audiences inform more than the social media strategy. They can inform the broader communication strategy. They can even change product development. People are feeding back in real time about your product or about the messages that you're putting out, and there's so much knowledge that can be gathered from doing that.
No, I'd agree.
Mm-hmm. So along those lines, I guess as we were saying, it's easy to sometimes focus just on the numbers and lose sight of even the bigger picture. Even with smaller insights, you lose sight of the larger picture, of the bigger picture of why we're doing this. So how do you address this in reports or otherwise with a client?
Well, I think one of the things that we do is we always try to set not just a monthly goal, but also more long-term goals. We usually do at least a quarterly goal to find out, to better measure what we're doing in the big picture, because sometimes you get lost a little bit in the day-to-day and not seeing that, oh yeah, the real main objective of this campaign is to do X. So like, how are we getting closer to that? What is our goal by the end of quarter one to get us closer to that main goal, whatever it is, whether it's a count or a reach or a fan count, whatever it is, but you should have those quarterly goals in place that'll help you along the way to reach it.
Mm. And I think we're going to head into this, but any insights or results that are communicated back internally or to a client should contain actionable insights. They should contain things that change the ongoing strategy of the campaign. I'm probably jumping ahead, but the one thing that you can do, if you're realizing that there's a certain piece of content that's working really well, that obviously changes the type of content that you create the next time around. And I'll give you a good example, and I think most people would have experienced this in one way or another. It can happen on a really small scale, like the one I'm about to tell, but can also happen on a really large scale. There are things that you can learn, even from a giant brand campaign to a public affairs campaign. There are things that you can learn from just daily social media interactions that can let you know what's going to work best across the broader gamut, across every sort of pillar of your marketing strategy. But I quite like this example because I just think it's cute. But another technology client, a different one than it seems that I only work on technology clients apparently, a different one to the Fireball story. But this client was coming, and I'm just taking credit for what was totally their idea, but they were working out their content plan for the next week, and they just launched this new mini camera that could be attached to a pet. So it was like a doggy camera. And one of the women in the office said, "Oh, I want to show a photo of my dog wearing this camera." So it got shared on their Twitter account, and people went crazy over it. This dog wearing this little camera around its neck. And it ended up that they created this full video series of this dog, who became quite the celebrity on their channels. And he went on little mini dates, and he ruined carpets, and you got this great sort of point of view style videos from this dog, and they were just hilarious. And that would never have happened had it not been that we understood from that one tweet that was something that people really liked. I mean, I would never have come up with that idea. I'd like to think that I would have. But I would never have thought, let's create a doggy video series of point of view style raw footage with this dog bashing its head into the carpet. You wouldn't have thought that would be, well, maybe I should have thought that. Pets do quite well on the internet, I've heard.
Cool. So I guess, yeah, let's just expand on that. I think the concept of optimization and real-time optimization is really important. You definitely want the clients to understand that you're using the insights and what you're learning, you're applying it as quickly as you possibly can. So let's just dive into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I think previously, when there wasn't so much data at hand and things weren't happening in real time, especially where I'm from in the PR world, it was perfectly reasonable to kind of produce quarterly reports, and quarterly reports are still important in the larger scheme of things. But at the moment, because things are so real time, we often find that you are every day analysing which messages are resonating better, and using that to shape the content that you put out that day. And a campaign that I really love that did this really nicely was the Oreo 100th birthday campaign. I don't know if anyone saw that, but it was really revolutionary. I think actually what people probably would have heard was you can still dunk in the dark post, which happened during the Super Bowl when there was the blackout, that was actually part of a giant campaign that they did, which allowed them to be really relevant with their content. They basically had a team of designers that were on standby, and every morning they looked at what was happening in the news and what people really cared about. So one week it was Pride Week, so they created an image of an Oreo with multicoloured layers of icing in between it, and it was this great, really piece of iconic artwork that was shared hundreds of thousands of times that day. And that model is very difficult. I mean, it's rare that there would be a company that would be able to invest in having people sitting there every day, analysing all of these conversations and tailoring your content for that specific trend of that day. But it was so successful, and you can see how relevant that is, and how high the expectations are from audiences to brands to be actually relevant in their day-to-day lives. But you can see how much that pays off in the long run. I would love to have more clients that were willing to do something like that.
Absolutely, yeah. Budget is definitely restrictive on that. But I know a lot in the media that, I read this. It seems like every week at least I hear about another, like a social media action center that's set up for a brand, and they're monitoring, or a lot of times it's agencies too doing it for all of their brands, whether it's general market or mix of Hispanic market as well. So I think more and more as we go, we're seeing the value of that real-time measurement of what happened yesterday or what's happened this morning. As Carla said, what's in the news, how can we react to what's trending, how can we add that into our content to make our overall presentation to our audience more engaging and get them to come back and visit us more often and purchase our products more often.
I actually sit in one of those rooms, and they're very hot. And I imagine there's lots of radiation coming at me from all these different screens. But they are really useful because you just have all of these screens with these different channels that you're monitoring in real time. And then you also have TVs in there, which I generally have on mute, which can be quite problematic if I've left it on one channel all day and then I look up and there's like a soap opera on. And then, the CEO comes in and thinks I'm mucking about in the office instead of doing work.
So we work on Facebook. And I think, it's an interesting point, and I think that kind of hearing you, optimization is all about also testing. And for example, like when I hear you give the example of Oreo, by placing that Pride image on their platform, Oreo knows more about the response. Like they know how, things about their community's just values and what's important to them. Like it gives you so much more information about your community, and social is such an easy way to test something like that. You could just have one post that's meaningful, you promote it, and it can tell you really important things about your community and your followers.
Right, and that's what's so brilliant about social media, especially platforms that are really sophisticated with audience targeting, like Facebook and Twitter. Just the level of granularity you can get on the specific people that you're targeting, the things that they're talking about, the interests that they have. Even if we haven't specified it in our Twitter profiles, there is a way to gauge those things. And there's even what I think is a really interesting and valuable one, and actually in my experience over the last couple of months, the most effective way to target people via Twitter is called TV targeting. I don't know if anyone's used it, but it is so effective, and it basically targets people based on the programs that they're watching and the programs that they're tweeting about. So if someone was watching Glee, there'd be a specific product that you think might fit within that audience, and it's a really accurate way of understanding who your messages will resonate best with, and then who to reach. It's absolutely been almost threefold more effective than our other targeting practices that we've used before.
Yeah, and there was a entire session that probably some of you joined about social TV the other day, and had some really, really good insights. Talked a bit about how important, how a few years ago we were just talking about how important was Twitter marketing, and now we're talking more about how effective it is for TV marketing, and combining those two screens. I think we're going to see more and more brands getting involved. Twitter is just a natural companion, and one of the funny quotes from that event was El Pajarito. Was people talking about, El Pajarito, you can, I want to communicate with my favorite novela star, but they didn't really know that it was Twitter, but they knew the little pájaros on the bottom of the page. So I think that it's normal. It's older generations. It's everybody that wants to communicate in more ways and get that content that they can't see.
Yeah, and even, the whole second screen solution, apart from the fact that that's a really great way to target people, it is so much more behavioural than we would really think. I think the word second, or the phrase second screen, sounds like something that's kind of very unemotional, not something that I would be compelled to do, and then I find myself doing it every day. And the other day, How I Met Your Mother just had the most terrible ending, and I was so... I won't spoil it. I won't spoil it. And it's polarizing, don't worry, plenty of people loved it, but I hated it. I was so mad. And then I jumped straight online and was just like, somebody agree with me, somebody tell me that I'm right, this was terrible. And actually the first things I saw were people saying they loved it, so.
No spoilers.
Yeah, they were so, well I was so disappointed. Everyone's like, oh, I'm crying. And I was like, what are you doing?
All right. So it's interesting because as we're talking about this, one of the things that I'm thinking about has been consistent for those of us that have been working with the U.S. Hispanic or the Latin America market for a while. It's interesting about the testing and optimization because I feel like by nature sometimes, especially kind of larger brands, are almost more willing to be riskier and bolder with their approach for like a segment of the market. And we find that, as a U.S. Hispanic focused agency, like we get things done faster and like we're more cutting edge sometimes than even the general market because there's obviously more at stake. It's like a broader, larger, like the PR is much uglier, on that side. So sometimes like you can think about your segment as an opportunity to be riskier and to be bolder and to try things out. And if they work there, then like they can migrate to the general market.
Right. I think there's interesting points about segmentation, and if anybody's familiar with Facebook marketing, you can target different, Hispanics in a certain way. You can target them many different ways, just doing the broad categorization, or you can target them by the likes, do the like Univision, etc. And if you've done it, you see that there's different price levels that you're going to pay. Like in general, a general market fan is more expensive than a Hispanic fan, but a Latin American fan is a lot less expensive than general market in general. So it's interesting findings from there. Now, as far as testing out a bit, I think one of the things that I guess is related. Sometimes our clients do that, where they do want to see how things react with our brand and with our Hispanic brand and find out if it'll work on the general market side. I don't know if they always tell us that, but but I think there are learnings from that. One final thing I would say on that is on that behalf, it's still scary that today that there are brands that will still have a general market agency do their Hispanic campaigns and their targeting, and which is fine if they know what they're doing. But if they don't, we see a lot of problems and people targeting general market consumers with Spanish-speaking posts, which can cause a big problem, as we all know. But based on the recent Coca-Cola controversy and the Star Spangled Banner, people do not like seeing Spanish or other languages on their pages, and so that's something to be wary of when targeting and practicing, seeing if other elements might work.
So true, and it's just becoming more and more of a priority. And I mean, for a company like Burson, which has been around a while and is quite large and takes a general market approach to a lot of things. Burson Latino is obviously a huge priority for us now, and growing and growing and growing, just because this is such a growing market, and also because Hispanic voices are louder on social media and louder on these new platforms. So I mean, it's an exciting time to be part of this industry and also to be Hispanic and part of it.
So we're gonna start with questions just after this last one. We do want to leave you guys with some specific ideas of tools that you can use to pull insights for yourselves. So you guys want to start?
Sure. I think one of the basic ones, of course, Google Analytics. And it's not just having the Google Analytics set up, which does take 5 minutes. It's actually learning a bit about what you should be looking for and how to make sense of those numbers. If you go more extensively, I think there's a lot of free tutorials that are done from Google Analytics themselves, as well as YouTube videos from many different sources, and they'll teach you how to set up things like goals to find out, how did somebody get to your contact form and fill it out? How did that happen? Where did it come from? What were the pages they went to before? So you can go really in depth with that tool. So I think that's one of the main things I I recommend. I think is another great tool, old-fashioned networking. So there's, in some of the cities, many major cities, there's a Web Analytics Wednesday, and it happens once a month, and it's on Wednesday, and they really just talk about web analytics and like how to get deep into the data. And it's great networking, and it's great, almost always free, valuable content. So you can look and see if Web Analytics Wednesday is in your city. Those are two of the things I mostly rely on, but.
Yeah, and there's so many tools. I feel like every week I have someone email me telling me that they've cracked sentiment. But the one I would use most frequently is Adobe Social. There's a couple of reasons why I love that tool. It is quite expensive, so you need to get a client that's willing to pay for it. But why it's quite useful, apart from the fact that it allows you to manage all of your social media channels and publish directly from there. It also allows you to track conversions. So you put pixels on the company's website as well. And the things I was talking about before, where you can track which pieces of content resulted in certain actions on a website. I just think that's so valuable, especially in PR world. It's really been impossible, apart from the typical circulation figures and advertising equivalents that we use to evaluate the press coverage that we get. Now you're able to see how those news articles are driving people to a website and then what people do. And it's so exciting when you see that an article is generating more purchase than perhaps an ad would. Makes me cheer for my PR, my PR days. But I mean, obviously it's the reverse sometimes as well. But I think being able to understand that user flow is really important, and I like that the tool allows you to do that. There's also other tools out there that I really enjoy, which Tracker is a really good one. Less about broad brushstrokes data analytics, but more about influencers and being able to identify particular people that might be particularly influential for your brand. I find it more useful than Clout in a lot of ways. And then there's also Hootsuite and some of the more standard ones as well.
And Gabrielle, I think you had some tools.
I use Curate and Statigram. So Statigram for Instagram, and Curate I use a lot for Pinterest. So those are the basic ones, and then obviously Facebook Insights, YouTube Insights. The tools themselves offer pretty decent. I have a bone to pick with Twitter, but that's another panel. So I guess we can get started with some questions if you guys have any. Oh, the pink back there was like immediate.
For Facebook specifically, so Facebook, if everybody knows that the difference between Twitter and Facebook is really that Twitter is basically 95, maybe 99% public, and Facebook is the opposite, and it's maybe 80% private. These are just guesses, but it's very different in how private versus public it is. So you're not going to have nearly as much content that's freely available on Facebook, so it's much harder to find. I would say in that specific situation, I don't know of a tool specifically for you, but I do know that there is, if you wanted to do something in-house, you can actually get the stream live. You can buy it from a company like DataSift or GNIP, and you can get the data that's specifically related to whether it's your brand, and you can pull that, you can use that data, raw data file, and you can manipulate it however you want, but you have to build a user interface to manipulate it. GNIP is GNIP, and then DataSift. DataSift has got a little bit more of a user-friendly user interface for you. I would maybe start with DataSift and see how that works. You can sample the data. They'll give you $10 free, so you can kind of see if this is like maybe the right way. But I don't know of any tool existing for it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. The custom building around the fire hose is probably the best bet. And really, there's a reason why Facebook Insights are designed to be the easiest for you to use. They try and cannibalize that intentionally. So, getting post-level data is typically the best way to get as much as you can from Facebook.
Yeah. Right here.
Does it continue the Facebook conversation? Because it is kind of controversial as the algorithm keeps changing, and in relation to the Hispanic market, or it's still being touted as the platform to reach your Hispanic audience, and we're like, okay, how we're paying to play, and everyone keeps looking for what's the metric now. I love that you brought up the term engagement, because exactly, like engagement, what does that even mean anymore? Are we looking to share? Are we looking to convert? We have people saying, well, it's the talking about. Oh, it's the virality. So
Yeah.
what would you say if we're paying to play? We're obviously not going to get organic anymore. What is the most relevant metric?
Engagement rate, and then taking it off platform from Facebook, your conversion rate. Once it gets onto that, that's the only metrics I use from Facebook. I don't use talking about this.
Like, oh no, the most important is talking about this. And I'm like,
Yeah, no, it's not. And just to put it in perspective, it is frustrating when Facebook is just the be-all and end-all in a lot of ways. What's really interesting is that, I'm sure you found this as well, Eric, but when you look at engagement rates on Facebook and Twitter usually wins. But the problem is, and especially for the Hispanic audience, Facebook, and I have my numbers in front of me so I didn't miss them, Facebook is 18 million. The next platform under that is LinkedIn, and it's 4.9. It's such a massive drop, and Twitter comes in third at 4. So Facebook is going to be the big thing for the next year and a half at least, until I'm sure that there are going to be significant changes within that time. Facebook is going to have some challenging years ahead of it, but the algorithm is changing. It's more noticeable to us that are dealing with it every day and can see how organic versus paid reach and engagement actually works. But from a brand perspective, it's going to take a while before that really catches on.
Okay. Right there in the back. Yeah. Yeah.
Question, how do you guys address audience verification and viewability?
Can you explain a bit more?
We know that there's, in terms of in Twitter, Facebook, there's a significant portion that's fake Twitter pages or fake Facebook pages. How do you know in terms of, are you clients asking for audience verification, and what tools are you using for that? And are your clients asking for viewability, right? And there's tons of billions of impressions that are being wasted and no one's actually engaging or watching.
Right. Yeah, I think that, to address your first point about, is it really a used channel? Is it a dead account or not? I know on most tools there's a way to filter out people that don't have a profile image or rarely use it. There's ways to have a clout score if you want to use that and make sure that they at least have a 40 or something like that. So that's one way that you can make sure that it's coming from a meaningful source. As far as making sure that the impressions are seen, I don't know, I'm not sure if I have any insights in particular. If you do.
Yeah, I'm not sure on that one, but specifically with your first part of that question, there's legitimate ways of recruiting new fans or followers, and then there's sort of the black hat ways of doing it. If you're doing it legitimately, the quality of the audience should be pretty high. Mm-hmm. So there shouldn't be an issue around inactive profiles because typically those people aren't, if they're genuinely humans, they're not seeing those posts and they're not then following the page or clicking through. So I don't see that challenge very much at all with any of the clients that I've been working on, at least recently. I know that was a really big issue for Twitter late last year. They were having a really big problem with spamming their promoted tweets. And there were lots of brands that had suffered, especially there was a 2-week period where there were some spammers that were really attacking them and were using up all of the cost per engagement budgets because they had some sort of tool that was just clicking on these posts, and it was a really big problem. They had to refund a lot of people, including us. But yeah, I think they've fixed that.
All right. Yeah.
If sentiment is so such an intangible, right, so hard to measure, and the community manager is the closest to estimating that, what would be like 3 KPIs that you would say in aggregate come the closest to measuring?
Yeah. Did you get? I might need you to repeat that.
What are the 3 KPIs that you would say get the closest to measuring sentiment? Assuming that obviously this is kind of like a qualitative assessment of the person closest to the content and the engagement.
Yeah, thanks for that. You really tested it. Thank you. That's my biggest bugbear. I mean, if you have an answer, if you have an answer, please tell me. I would say, we evaluate sentiment manually if we ever want to use it. There wouldn't necessarily be a circumstance where we were trying to pull together other KPIs to help understand whether a sentiment was high or not. Even if you're seeing a really high engagement rate, it could be a really polarized engagement, and unless you're looking at a sentiment number, you can't tell. So I would advise against trying to aggregate other figures to inform what you think the sentiment is. I think it's a real problem, obviously, because I keep talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would measure is, if we're talking about sentiment, for one of the recent client projects we did, we wound up doing it mostly manual, and we did a couple hundred tweets and just to manually do the sentiment. And one of the things that we found most interesting that we were looking for was the difference between what males and females said, and then also when they mentioned the sentiment, for this was specifically cars, what were the cars they mentioned when that, so if we saw a specific car brand name, with what was the sentiment for that versus the other one. So I think combining that sentiment with a second level of data, I think, is always important. So I guess that would be my best.
And actually, the other thing that we do that I should have mentioned is a like and a share is a positive sentiment. I don't know if everyone would agree with that, but if someone has retweeted or directly shared your post and hasn't added on any commentary, I would see that as being positive. I would see that as a positive contribution to the overall share of voice, and that's very easy to measure.
Yeah. Right here?
So adding to that question, and I don't know if you talked about this early on because I came in a little late, I apologize, but how do you then, from the sentiment, add the complexity of language? Because I'm in PR, and thank you for the things that you've said. Adding the language component, it's like, some sites, they don't subscribe to any programs where it allows you to check analytics, or if you do, they mess up the language, and then if you even have a human being, they have to be a bilingual human being.
Right. We did cover this only briefly at the beginning.
Yeah.
Radian 6, I find, is the best for mixed language.
Well, I've got a pretty specific example for that. We used a few years back for Charmin toilet paper. Everybody knows the Bears, right? Yeah. So we did an interesting research for them, and it was what did people think about the Bears in general? Did they like it? And their new campaign was "Enjoy the Go." So using Crimson Hexagon, we could evaluate what was the Spanish conversation, what was the English conversation. What did the English speaker say? Were they saying good things, bad things, looking at the sentiment? And with Crimson Hexagon, again, you can train it. So we told it what was good and what was bad. So using that, we found that in English, people were very cynical and very much against Enjoy the Go and the whole ad campaign run. Whereas in Spanish, it was much more positive. It's so nice to be able to tell a client that, your Hispanic consumers love you. It's like, it was great. So being able to say that and then finding things for them, such as the way that people would use the word Charmin and for much further than the brand was ever really made for. So people would say, extraño a mi osito Charmin. I miss my little Charmin bear, So people would say that, and we saw people are using your brand as a very positive thing in general to mean their girlfriend or boyfriend.
Any other questions? All right. Oh, one in the back?
Well, I think because sorry, this is Andrea with Modern Communications. I've worked a lot with bloggers, and since we're in the company, a lot of great bloggers. There's also the whole influencer relationship management sort of, avenue, and working with tools like Social Chorus or Dynamic Signal. Can you help me understand in terms of the power middle, those influencers that are now really taking sort of a lead, in journalism and really driving a lot of brand conversation? Where do you think that's going in terms of really celebrating the power middle, engaging them with the brand, and what kind of tools would you recommend to really engage in building those communities?
So Tracker was a good tool for helping to identify influencers, but I think your question is more around influencer relationship management. And you mentioned Social Force. We use a custom version of what Salesforce have is, they call it PR Force. It's actually what Salesforce used to outreach to PR people, but they let us use it and we customize it so that it can be used to understand which influencers are going to work best for certain clients, and to track outreach and engagement. That would probably be my preference, but I completely agree with you. Influencer engagement is going to be even bigger as the years progress, and it's so interesting to see how the dynamic has changed between traditional journalism and sort of new journalism. Just a small anecdote was back in Australia, one of our big media communities started prohibiting bloggers from joining. Because they weren't seen as journalists, and there was a huge backlash around it, including from the PR community saying, no, these are the people that are actually influencing perhaps even more than you. It was really interesting to see that happen. That was a few years ago now. It wouldn't happen now. But yeah.
All right.
I think we're time.
One more question?
Yeah, so, hi, I'm Susanna. So clearly, you all talked about the importance of reaching the U.S. Hispanics. I'm curious to hear what tactics you all use when kind of tailoring campaigns around U.S. Hispanics, social campaigns, web campaigns, PR campaigns, what you kind of use to actually harness the power of the U.S. Hispanic, and if you wish there was something a little bit more effective to be able to more accurately reach them.
When you say harness the power, you mean to re-engage with them, or could you?
Yeah, so, I mean, we all know that they over-index in social, entertainment, video. They have a $1.5 trillion buying power to really kind of target and channel, a message from, either through social or, via one of your clients, what kind of like tactics you feel work best to kind of reach that. And, clearly I think a few have been mentioned, translating, bilingual, culturally relevant headlines, but kind of curious to hear from you guys what you feel works best, and if maybe there was something better that you guys wish would be out there to help.
Yeah, I mean, as far as what works best, I know a lot of time on some of the channels that we work with, bringing it close to home where they can send pictures of things that happen in their families, or share content with us that relates to them, but then we want to see this from them, and then we want to reward them, and maybe it's a goodie bag or something like that. Those are huge. I think just general, like, easier stuff, I think holidays, things like that, I think are really big. I'm trying to think of a wish list I have. Yeah. Maybe give me a sec.
I think what I would say there is that this is a very special community, as we've been talking about a lot today, but also there are parallels in just the nuances of communities across the US. And really, when it comes to how you approach those different groups, micro-targeting and understanding those audiences on a deep level is the best way to approach it. I wouldn't say that there are any generalized, obviously there's channels and there's content types, and perhaps nuances in the communications that are learned, and there are, what all of our Hispanic specialty agencies and specialty practices are all focused on really understanding. But I think when it comes down to it, and in terms of basic principles, it's micro-targeting, understanding the cultural nuances, and getting that formula that I mentioned right, the content by the channel, by the audience, resulting in that action.
For wish list, I was thinking about it, and I would think that my wish list would, Latinos would identify themselves a little more and make my job a lot easier.
Yeah. Good one.
But trying to find them is, it's a challenge, but it is fun. So, either finding the language they speak. Okay, so maybe they speak Spanish, but, where did it come from? Oh, it came from the United States. Great. We can use that data and use that to relate with. LinkedIn, I think that it's really hard for us to use that to target Hispanics. We rarely do it because we just haven't had much luck with it. I think it's almost always Twitter and Facebook. Those would probably be my two biggest wishes, I guess.
All right. So we have to run, but I think we'll be available for questions for a few minutes after. So thanks, everybody. Hi, how are you?
I do.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming.
Hi.
How do you like the conference so far?